The letter shook in Nathaniel Sterling's hands as he stood before the locked iron gates of his own estate on a blazing Virginia summer morning. He had ridden through the night, not for love, not for duty, but because Victoria Hale had laughed in his face and taken his last coin. He expected Eleanor to be waiting. He expected forgiveness. Instead, the gate did not open, and the letter in his hands said the name Sterling no longer belonged to him. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel, follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1817 came hard and hot to the Virginia countryside, the kind of summer that cracked the dry earth and turned the creeks slow and lazy, the kind that made honest men sweat through their shirts by mid-morning and made wealthy men retreat into their cool parlors and pretend the world outside didn't exist. Nathaniel Sterling had always been a man of the parlor, not because he was weak. No, nobody who had ever shaken Nathaniel Sterling's hand would call him weak. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that could cut across a crowded room and make every man in it feel like they were being measured. He had his father's jawline and his grandfather's name, and in Virginia, those two things together were worth more than most men earned in a lifetime. The Sterling name. It opened doors before he knocked. It cleared rooms before he entered. It preceded him into every bank, every courthouse, every gentleman's club, from Richmond to Charlottesville. He had grown up believing it always would. He had been wrong. The road back to Sterling Manor ran 12 miles through farmland that had once belonged to his family for 3 generations. Fields of tobacco and corn stretched long and golden in the morning heat. Fence posts stood straight. Barns wore fresh coats of whitewash. The tenant farmers who worked those fields looked well-fed, their children running barefoot through the rows without the hollow eyes that marked true poverty. Nathaniel noticed none of it. I was too busy rehearsing what he would say. Eleanor, I have made terrible mistakes. Eleanor, I have come home. Eleanor, I need you. Simple words. Honest for once. The kind of words he had not spoken in 2 years, not since he had stopped looking at his wife and started looking at everything she was not. He had ridden through the night. His coat was dusty. His horse was tired. He himself felt something he had not felt since boyhood. Something he did not have a clean word for, something that sat in his chest like a stone soaked in cold water. Shame, maybe, or grief, or both at once, wound together so tight he couldn't separate them. Victoria was gone. That was the simple truth he had not yet allowed himself to say aloud. Victoria Hale, the woman who had laughed at his jokes and touched his arm and looked at him the way no woman had. In years, Victoria had looked at his empty coat pocket 2 nights ago and smiled the way a cat smiles at a mouse it has already decided not to eat. Darling. She had said, her voice as sweet and sharp as spring wine. I do adore you, but adoration doesn't pay the dressmaker. He had stared at her. Nathan, you spent the last of the quarterly allowance on that dinner at Whitmore's Inn. I kept the receipts, I know, to the penny. She had shrugged one perfect shoulder. I think it's best you go home. Sort out your affairs. Come back when you have something worth coming back with. He had stood in the doorway of her parlor in Richmond. The city, he had told himself, was where real life happened. The parties, the laughter, the people who understood sophistication, and he had felt the floor tilt beneath him. She had already turned back to her mirror. He had not slept since. The iron gates of Sterling Manor came into view just as the sun cleared the tree line and the heat began to press down in earnest. Nathaniel's first thought was that something was wrong with his eyes. The gates were closed. Not just closed, locked. A heavy chain, new by the look of it, wrapped through the iron bars. And standing just inside, arms folded, looking at him with an expression of absolute professional neutrality, was Thomas, a man who had worked the Sterling grounds since Nathaniel was 9 years old. Thomas. Nathaniel pulled his horse to a stop. Open the gate. Thomas did not move. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling. Not Master Sterling. Not the title that had followed him his whole life like a shadow. Thomas. Nathaniel's voice took on its familiar tone, the one that had never needed to raise itself to be obeyed. I said open the gate. I understand, sir. Thomas's eyes were steady, and Nathaniel saw something in them that confused him. Not hostility, not quite. Something older and quieter. Sorrow, maybe. Resignation. "I've been given instructions. I can't open the gate without authorization from Mrs. Sterling." The morning heat felt suddenly hotter. "Mrs. Sterling," Nathaniel repeated slowly, "is my wife." "Yes, sir." "Which means this is my home." Thomas's expression didn't change. "I'm just following instructions, sir. There's an envelope waiting for you. Left here at the gate first thing this morning. Mrs. Sterling said you'd come by today." She knew he was coming. Even his return she had anticipated, planned for, prepared. Thomas reached through the bars and held out a plain white envelope. Nathaniel stared at it. "She knew," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Sterling knows most things, sir," Thomas said. And there was something in the way the old man said it, not unkindly, but with a weight that suggested a long and complicated truth, that made Nathaniel's hand hesitate before he took the envelope. He broke the seal. Inside was a single page, written not in Eleanor's hand, but in the formal typeface of a legal document. The letterhead read, "Samuel Carter, S.Q. Family Law and Estate Matters, Richmond, Virginia." Nathaniel read the first line, then read it again. "By order of the Family Trust Agreement executed in the year of our Lord, 1802, and amended pursuant to Article 7, Section 3. Thereof, Nathaniel James Sterling is hereby removed from the position of primary trustee and head of Sterling Estate, effective the 14th day of June, 1817. The paper made a small sound as the edges crinkled in his grip. He read further. The trust, it seemed, contained a clause his own father had written decades ago, a clause Nathaniel had signed without reading on his wedding day, that stipulated the estate's primary trustee could be removed by unanimous decision of the family council. If said trustee demonstrated consistent mismanagement of estate resources, neglect of fiduciary duty, or conduct unbefitting the Sterling name. Beneath this summary was a list. 3 pages single-spaced of dates and figures. Money withdrawn. Accounts drained. Payments missed. Debts accumulated in Nathaniel's name at establishments in Richmond that the list described only as houses of entertainment and personal indulgence. It was he realized everything. Every foolish dinner. Every gift he had bought Victoria. Every night he had stayed in the city instead of coming home. Every morning he had thought to himself, "Eleanor will manage it. Eleanor always manages." Someone had been watching. Someone had been writing it all down. "Thomas," Nathaniel said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "Who prepared this?" "Mr. Carter, sir. Family lawyer." "I know who Carter is." A pause. Did my wife ask him to do this? Did she plan this?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "No, sir," he said at last. "From what I understand, Mr. Carter came to Mrs. Sterling. He'd been watching the accounts. He was worried. He said it was his duty to the family trust." Another pause. "Mrs. Sterling tried to stop him at first, sir. She asked him to give you more time." Nathaniel looked up. "She asked him to give me more time?" "Yes, sir. Twice from what I heard. But Mr. Carter said the trust didn't allow for sentiment. Said it was his legal obligation." Thomas shifted slightly. "Mrs. Sterling didn't argue the third time?" Nathaniel folded the letter. He folded it very carefully, the way a man folds something he cannot afford to destroy, because it is the only real thing he has left. "Is she inside?" "Mrs. Sterling is in the East Garden, sir. But she left word that she won't be receiving visitors this morning." Visitors. He was a visitor now in the house where his grandfather had been born. He did not leave. He tied his horse at the post near the gate and sat down on the stone wall beside it in the full glare of the Virginia summer sun in his travel-dusty coat, and he waited. He was not sure what he was waiting for. He told himself he was waiting for Eleanor to change her mind. But somewhere beneath that, somewhere honest and quiet, he suspected he was waiting for himself to become someone worth letting through the gate. The morning passed. Farm workers came and went on the road, giving him curious glances. A pair of women from the neighboring property drove past in a cart and stared openly. One whispered something to the other, and they both looked away quickly when he met their eyes. He recognized with a dim and nauseating clarity that by sundown everyone in the county would know. Nathaniel Sterling sitting outside his own locked gate in the heat. The story would spread the way all stories spread in small places, fast and not kindly. Around mid-morning, a boy of perhaps 12 came running from the direction of the house, stopped just inside the gate, and looked at Nathaniel with the frank and untroubled curiosity of the very young. "You're Mr. Sterling," the boy said. "I am." "Mrs. Sterling's husband." "That's right." The boy considered this. "Why are you sitting outside?" Nathaniel looked at him. "Because I did something foolish." The boy nodded seriously, as though this explained everything and settled the matter completely. "My pa says foolish men got to sit with their foolishness a while before they learn anything from it." "Your pa sounds like a wise man." "He's a tenant farmer, sir. He ain't got much else but wisdom." The boy paused. "You want some water? I could bring some." Nathaniel opened his mouth to decline and then stopped. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." The boy ran back toward the house. 5 minutes later, he returned with a tin cup of cool water passed through the bars of the gate, which Nathaniel accepted without speaking, and drank entirely. It was, he realized, the first act of genuine kindness anyone had shown him in longer than he could easily remember. Eleanor Sterling came to the gate at noon. She walked through the heat without hurrying, her pale dress catching the summer light, her dark hair pinned neatly despite the temperature. She carried nothing. She stopped on her side of the iron bars and looked at him with eyes that were steady and quiet and absolutely unreadable. She was thinner than when he had left. He noticed that first and felt the noticing like a small wound. "Nathaniel," she said. Not husband. Not Nat the way she used to call him in the early years when his name and her voice had sounded like something worth being. "Eleanor." He stood. "Please open the gate." "No," she said. Simply. Without cruelty, without triumph. "Eleanor, I have nowhere to go." "That is not quite true. You have enough to rent rooms in Richmond. Mr. Carter made sure the financial arrangement is fair. You'll receive a monthly allowance from the estate income. You won't be destitute." "I don't want an allowance." He stepped toward the gate. "I want to come home. Eleanor. I want to come home." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Something moved through her eyes too fast to name, too real to deny. Then it settled back into stillness. "This stopped being your home," she said, "when you decided it was only a name to carry and a property to spend." "That's not fair." "No," she agreed. "It isn't. None of this has been fair." She tilted her head slightly. "Would you like to talk about what's fair, Nathaniel? Shall we discuss the 3 years I spent reviewing accounts you didn't bother to read? The workers I kept on when you were spending their wages on dinners in Richmond? The repairs I managed on the South Barn while you were telling Victoria Hale about how difficult your life was?" Her voice never rose. It was worse somehow for staying so level. "I kept this estate alive. I did it quietly because it is my home and I love it, and because I believed for far longer than was wise that you would come back to yourself." "I have come back," he said. "You have come back," she repeated. "Yes, but Nathaniel, you didn't come back for me. You came back because Victoria sent you away." The words landed with the precision of something carefully aimed. He couldn't argue with them. He had thought on the long ride through the night that he might construct some argument that made his return seem like a choice rather than a flight. Standing in front of her, he understood that she had always been able to see through constructed arguments. He had simply stopped caring about that for a while. "I know why I came back," he said. "But I also know, Eleanor, I know what I lost. I know what I threw away." "Then you know more than you did." She stepped back from the gate. "That matters. I want you to know that it matters. But knowing what you lost is not the same as deserving to have it returned." "What do I have to do?" She was quiet. A bird called somewhere in the trees along the drive. The heat settled around them both. "I don't know," she said at last. "And I am not going to tell you. If you have to ask me what to do to become worthy of this life again, you haven't understood anything yet." She turned and walked back toward the house. "Eleanor." He said her name and she stopped, but didn't turn. The boy who brought me water. Is his father doing well? The Tennant family. A pause. When she answered, her voice carried something complicated in it. The Holt family. Yes. They've had a difficult spring. We restructured their rent payment last month. They're stable now. You did that. She turned just far enough that he could see her profile. Someone had to. Then she walked back to the house, and the gate stayed locked, and Nathaniel Sterling sat back down on the stone wall in the summer heat, and held a folded legal document that told him in the clean language of the law what he had spent years deciding without realizing he was deciding anything at all. I was still sitting there at late afternoon when he heard the sound of horses on the road and looked up to see a black carriage bearing the seal of a Richmond law firm turning into the Sterling Drive. Samuel Carter stepped down. Carter was 40 years old, a compact man with close-cut gray at his temples and eyes that had spent 20 years reading contracts and not missing the things people didn't put into them. He stopped when he saw Nathaniel and held his gaze for a moment, not with satisfaction, not with hostility. With the particular careful neutrality of a man who knew he had done something difficult and had made his peace with it. Carter, Nathaniel said. Nathaniel. The lawyer walked toward him. I expected you this morning. I've been here since morning. Carter looked at the locked gate, then at Nathaniel, and did not comment on the obvious. May I speak with you? You've already spoken plenty. 3 pages single-spaced. Yes. Carter sat down on the wall beside him without being invited. It was a small presumption, but something about the ease of it suggested it wasn't meant to establish dominance, just to have a conversation between two people without one of them towering over the other. I want to explain something, Nathaniel. Not the legal situation you can read. What I want to explain is why. Why you went behind my back. Why I did my job. The trust has language in it. Your father put there deliberately. He didn't trust the name alone to protect the estate. He trusted the structure. Carter looked out at the fields. Your wife didn't ask me to do this. I want to be clear about that. She came to me 3 months ago with the account books not to build a case against you. She came to me because she was frightened. She had been covering deficits for nearly a year. She needed advice on how long she could sustain it. Nathaniel stared at him. She was covering deficits. For 11 months, using her own inheritance, the settlement from her father's estate that she brought into the marriage, quietly, without telling anyone. The stone wall was very warm from the afternoon sun. Nathaniel put his hands on it and felt the heat through his palms. She was paying my debts, he said, with her own money. Yes. Why didn't she tell me? Carter looked at him with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite contempt, but lived somewhere in the narrow territory between them. What do you imagine would have happened if she had? Nathaniel didn't answer because the answer was plain and neither of them needed to hear it spoken aloud. He would have dismissed it, would have told her she was exaggerating, would have told her he had plans to address the accounts just as soon as the current situation in Richmond resolved itself. He would have gone back to Victoria's parlor and her careful smile and her way of making him feel like the man he wanted to be instead of the man he was becoming. She carried it alone, he said. She is a capable woman, Carter said. In my professional opinion, one of the most capable I have encountered in 20 years of estate law. Which is why, when I told her what the trust language required, that I had a legal obligation to report the fiduciary situation to the family council. She didn't fight me. She simply said, do what you must. I will manage. Nathaniel looked at the locked gate. I will manage. 3 words. The whole philosophy of her life, and he had spent 2 years treating it as an inconvenience rather than a gift. She's not going to let me back in, he said. Is she? That is not my business, Carter said carefully. What is my business is telling you that the trust allows for a petition. If you can demonstrate over a period of time that you have addressed the issues that led to your removal, financial responsibility, consistent management, evidence of changed conduct, the family council can reconsider. It is a long process. It requires more than words. How long? A minimum of 2 years. Possibly 3. Nathaniel was quiet. "And Eleanor," he said finally. "What does she want?" Carter stood straightening his coat against the heat. "I am her lawyer, Nathaniel, not her confessor. I won't speak to what she wants." He paused. "I'll say only this. She asked me when I first told her what I was legally obligated to do. She asked me if there was any way to give you more time. She asked me twice. I told her the trust didn't allow for personal sentiment in matters of this kind." He picked up his hat. "She is a woman who loved her husband. She may be a woman who loves him still. But she is also a woman who learned over 3 years that love and rescue are not the same thing." He nodded once. "Good afternoon, Nathaniel." The carriage wheels turned on the gravel drive and faded down the road. The summer sun was sliding west, throwing long gold shadows across the locked gate and the fence posts and the fields beyond. Somewhere in those fields, the Holt family was finishing their workday. Somewhere inside the house, Eleanor was, he didn't know, reading, managing something, being as she always was exactly who she was. He hadn't known who she was. Not really. He had lived beside her for 5 years and had somehow seen only the surface, the management, the quietness, the patience, without ever understanding what it cost her, without ever asking. He stood up from the stone wall. He untied his horse. For a long moment he stood there with his hand on the saddle, looking at the house through the iron bars of the gate. The house he'd been born in, the house his father had told him, represented everything the Sterling name stood for. He had believed the name was the thing. He understood now, standing outside it in the late summer heat with dust on his coat and an empty pocket and a folded letter that stripped him of everything he'd inherited. He understood now that the name had never been the thing. Eleanor had been the thing. Eleanor who had paid his debts with her own inheritance and said nothing. Eleanor who had protected his workers and his land and his reputation while he sat in Richmond pretending his real life was somewhere other than where it actually was. Eleanor who had looked at him through iron bars on a summer morning and said with perfect honesty, "You came back because Victoria sent you away, because she knew him well enough to say the true thing, and she had always known him that well, and he had mistaken that knowledge for ordinary." He mounted and rode back toward the road. He did not know what he was going to do. He did not have a plan. He had, for the first time in a long time, nothing but the unembellished truth of where he stood outside. Locked out of the only life that had ever been real. Carrying the weight of choices he had made slowly, and then all at once, the way men ruin things, not in a single dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small decisions that seem insignificant, until the morning you arrive at a locked gate and understand that each one of them was a lock being turned. The road back to the main town was 12 miles. He rode it slowly, and somewhere around the 8th mile in the long gold light of a Virginia summer evening, with the sound of crickets rising from the fields and the smell of warm earth all around him, Nathaniel Sterling did something he had not done since he was a boy. He stopped. He sat on his horse in the middle of the empty road, and he wept. Not gracefully, not quietly wept, the way a man weeps when there's no one to perform it for, raw and ungainly and entirely honest. He wept for Eleanor, who had deserved better. He wept for himself, not the self-pity of a man who has lost what he wanted, but something older and more real. Grief for the man he had been before he decided that a name was the same thing as a character. He wept until he was empty. Then he wiped his face with his dusty sleeve, straightened in the saddle, and rode the last 4 miles to town in the dying summer light. He did not know yet whether it was too late, but for the first time in 2 years, he was asking the right question. The town of Harlow's Creek had 1 boarding house, 1 tavern, 1 general store, and exactly 0 tolerance for scandal involving families of consequence. Nathaniel discovered this within 20 minutes of arriving. He had barely dismounted at the boarding house when Mrs. Pruitt, the owner, a woman of 60 with iron-gray hair and a memory like a courthouse ledger, opened the front door and looked at him with an expression that told him she had already heard everything. "Mr. Sterling," she said. The name landed carefully, not warmly. "Mrs. Pruitt, I need a room." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. $2 a week, breakfast at 7, no guests after 9. A pause that carried the weight of a full sermon. "And I run a respectable house." "I know you do," he said. "That's why I came here." She said nothing more, just handed him a key and pointed him up the stairs. The room was small and clean and smelled of cedar and dried lavender. There was a single window that looked out over the main road. He could see, if he leaned the right way, the road that led north toward Sterling Manor. He did not lean that way. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed in his dusty coat and held the folded legal document and did not sleep for a very long time. Morning came loud. The boarding house walls were thin enough that he heard everything: Mrs. Pruitt in the kitchen below, the clatter of a delivery wagon on the road, two men talking outside the general store across the street, their voices carrying in the still summer air. He heard his own name, more than once. By the time he came downstairs for breakfast, the table had 4 other boarders, a traveling merchant, 2 brothers passing through on their way to Tennessee, and a young schoolteacher named Mr. Aldous, who had taken a position in the county last spring. They all knew who he was. He could see it in the way conversation shifted when he entered the way. Eyes moved carefully to their plates. The merchant, a man named Fowler, with a red face and the cheerful social obliviousness of someone who had made peace with being unwelcome in many places, was the only one who spoke directly. "You're the Sterling boy," Fowler said, sawing at a piece of ham. "Heard you're having some difficulty with the property." "Some," Nathaniel said. "Wife locked you out, they're saying." "That's an oversimplification." "Usually is." Fowler pointed his fork philosophically. "In my experience, when a woman locks a man out of his own house, the man has done something considerably more than an oversimplification." He chewed thoughtfully. "What did you do?" The young schoolteacher made a small pained noise. "I made choices," Nathaniel said, "that I am currently in the process of regretting." Fowler nodded, as though this were a satisfactory and completely familiar answer. "Well, regretting's a start, I reckon. The trick is not to stop there." He went back to his ham. The conversation mercifully moved on. But Nathaniel sat with Fowler's words, the way you sit with something that sounds simple, until you turn it over and find it's heavier than it looked. The trick is not to stop there. He had spent the whole night moving between regret and self-recrimination, and the particular dark spiral of wondering whether any of it could be undone, and none of that, not a single hour of it, had felt like forward motion. He needed to do something. He just didn't yet know what. Samuel Carter's office was on the 2nd floor above the dry goods store, a small set of rooms that smelled of paper and beeswax, and the kind of disciplined order that communicated clearly and without ostentation that the man who worked here took his work seriously. Carter looked up when Nathaniel came in and set down his pen with the measured calm of a man who had expected this visit. "You look like you didn't sleep," Carter said. "I didn't." Nathaniel sat down across the desk. "I need to understand the trust language, all of it, not the summary, the actual document." Carter studied him. "Why?" "Because I signed something on my wedding day without reading it, and I need to know exactly what I agreed to." Something shifted in Carter's expression, not approval exactly, but something adjacent to it. He reached for a drawer. "That's the first intelligent thing you've said in this office in 3 years. He placed the document on the desk between them. It was thick, nearly 40 pages of dense, careful legal language written in his father's era, drafted by a lawyer who had clearly anticipated problems the Sterling family might not want to articulate out loud. Nathaniel pulled it toward him and started at the beginning. He read for 2 hours. Carter worked at his own desk across the room, answering letters, reviewing other clients' files, occasionally glancing over with the measured patience of a man who could afford to wait. He did not interrupt. He did not explain. He let Nathaniel read. At the end of the first hour, Nathaniel stopped and said without looking up, "Article 4, the management responsibilities." "Yes," Carter said. "My father wrote this to require the estate head to conduct quarterly reviews of all accounts, meet with the tenant representatives, and maintain records of all significant expenditures." He kept his voice even. "I haven't done a quarterly review in 31 months, Carter said. "I checked." Nathaniel sat back. 31 months. Nearly 3 years of obligations he had simply stopped performing somewhere in the gradual slide from carelessness into genuine neglect. Eleanor must have managed the tenant meetings. She must have kept records. She had been doing his job alongside her own quietly without being asked. Did she ever tell the tenants, he asked, that she was running things? Carter set down his pen. Not explicitly, but people who work land know who's managing it. They know who shows up when the creek floods the south field. They know who sends someone to help when a worker's family gets sick. They know who reviews the rent agreements and asks whether the figures are fair. He paused. They knew it was Mrs. Sterling. And not me. And not you. The room was quiet, except for the sound of the street below. Horses, a woman calling to someone across the way. The ordinary noise of a town going about its business, while Nathaniel sat in a lawyer's office, discovering the dimensions of what he had abandoned. Article 7, he said. The petition process. Yes. Walk me through it. Carter came around to his side of the desk and sat in the adjacent chair. A different posture than the formal distance of their previous conversation. This was a man settling in to explain something in detail, and the small gesture of it, choosing to sit beside, rather than across, registered as something Nathaniel filed away without examining too closely. The petition requires 3 things, Carter said. First, a demonstrated period of financial responsibility, 2 years minimum, with documented accounts. Not just paying debts, building something, showing the council that you understand what management actually means. He looked at him squarely. Second, evidence of genuine changed conduct. Not words, Nathaniel. Documented actions. Consistent over time. The council is not sentimental, and they are not easily impressed by speeches. And the third, Carter was quiet for a moment. The third is the hardest. The primary trustee, Eleanor, has to agree to appear before the council and not contest your petition. He let that sit in the air between them. She doesn't have to support it. She just can't actively oppose it. But she has to be present. Nathaniel understood. So even if I do everything right, the accounts, the conduct, all of it, she can end it by simply refusing. Yes. Then nothing I do in the next 2 years matters unless she... Everything you do in the next 2 years matters regardless, Carter said quietly but firmly. Whether or not Eleanor ever opens that gate, Nathaniel, whether or not the council ever meets, those years of your life will be what they are. You will either have spent them becoming someone worth respecting, or you will have spent them waiting for a woman to rescue you again. He picked up his pen and returned to his own desk. That choice has nothing to do with legal proceedings. Nathaniel spent the afternoon walking, not walking on foot through the town and the roads around it the way he hadn't done since he was a young man before he had a horse of his own. There was something different about seeing things from the ground rather than from a saddle. You moved slower. You heard more. People were less likely to step aside or remove their hats. Most people, in fact, did not remove their hats. A woman he recognized from church functions. He couldn't immediately remember her name, which struck him suddenly as a symptom of something nodded to him with the careful courtesy reserved for people whose situations are too complicated for warmth. 2 men outside the blacksmith's stopped talking when he passed and resumed after he was gone. A girl of about 8 stared openly from a doorway until her mother pulled her inside. He had been, for most of his adult life, a man people noticed because of what he represented. The Sterling's name, moving through a room, through a town, had a particular effect, a deference that he had always received as natural, as simply the way things were, without spending a great deal of time considering why. Because his grandfather had built something, and his father had sustained it, and he had inherited both the thing and the deference that came with it, and he had never asked whether the deference was for him, or for the name, or for the work that had built them both. Now, walking through Harlow's Creek with no deference coming his way, he understood something he should have understood long ago. The deference had never been for him. It had been for the effort, the years of management, the tenant meetings and the account reviews, and the flood response and the quietly renegotiated rents. All the work he hadn't done. All the work Eleanor had done in his place. He stopped outside the general store, where a notice board was covered in the usual papers, auction announcements, land notices, a printed broadsheet from Richmond. In the middle of the board, half covered by an auction notice, was a handwritten message. To the families of the Sterling tenant lands. The June rent adjustment meeting will be held July 3rd at 10 in the morning at the Manor House East Parlor. All tenants welcome. E. Sterling. July 3rd. 3 weeks away. He stared at it for a long time. He wrote her a letter that evening. He sat at the small table in his boarding house room with paper and ink and wrote 3 different versions. Each one worse than the last one. 2. Apologetic one. 2. Argumentative one that somehow managed to be both at once. He burned each of them in the candle flame. The 4th version was short. Eleanor, I read the trust document today. All of it. I understand now what I failed to do and for how long I failed to do it. I am not writing to ask for anything. I am writing to say that whatever you need from the accounts from Carter, from any documentation of the estate finances, I will make available without dispute. You shouldn't have to fight for information about your own home. I also want to say I know about the 11 months. Carter told me. I am sorry. That word is not sufficient, but it is the truest one I have. Nathaniel. He folded it and sealed it and walked down to ask Mrs. Pruitt if she had any way to get a letter to Sterling Manor. Mrs. Pruitt took the letter without comment. Then she looked at him over her reading spectacles and said with the brisk honesty of a woman who had seen 40 years of human foolishness, "She's a good woman, your wife." "I know," he said. "Do you?" "Because in my observation, men who know their wives are good women don't generally require their wives to cover 11 months of debt in secret." She handed him back his candle. "Go to bed, Mr. Sterling. Morning's early." The reply came 3 days later. It was not from Eleanor. It was from Margaret Whitmore, Eleanor's oldest friend-daughter of the same Richmond lawyer, whose family had been intertwined with the Whitmore side of Eleanor's family for 2 generations. Margaret was 2 years older than Eleanor, quicker to anger and to laughter both, and she had been in the years of Nathaniel and Eleanor's marriage the one person in the county who had never pretended to like Nathaniel when she didn't. The letter was short. "Mr. Sterling, Eleanor received your letter. She asked me to reply because she is not yet ready to correspond with you directly, and she is honest enough to tell you that rather than leave you waiting for an answer that isn't coming. She said to tell you the financial documents are yours to access at any time. Mr. Carter has instructions to share them fully." She also said, and I am quoting her precisely because she made me write it twice, to be sure I had it right. "Tell him that knowing is not enough. Doing is what matters now. I am adding on my own authority, and not on hers, if you hurt her again in any way at any point, under any circumstances, I will ensure that the story of what you did reaches every drawing room between here and Washington. I am not a woman who makes idle threats, Mr. Sterling. Ask anyone who knows me. Margaret Whitmore." He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his coat pocket and felt something he had not expected. Something almost like relief. Because the letter meant Eleanor had received his words. She had read them. She had chosen to respond even if indirectly. She had not thrown the letter in the fire. It was not forgiveness. It was not even the beginning of forgiveness. But it was a door left ajar, and Nathaniel had stood outside enough locked gates in the past week to understand the difference. He started with the accounts. Carter gave him access to 3 years of estate records, not just the trust documents, but the actual ledgers. Detailed, meticulous in Eleanor's handwriting for the most recent entries and in the estate manager's hand before that. He spent a week going through them at Carter's office, arriving at 8 in the morning and staying until the light failed. What he found was not what he expected. He had assumed with the vague, unconsidered assumption of a man who has never looked carefully at something he benefits from, that the estate ran on the strength of the Sterling name and the existing systems his grandfather had built, that it was in some fundamental sense self-sustaining, that it didn't particularly require anyone to manage it actively, it simply continued. He had been wrong. The estate required constant, specific, expert management. Crop decisions, tenant negotiations, equipment maintenance, soil management, water rights, market timing, labor relations, because the workers on Sterling land were free men and women paid wages, not enslaved persons, a fact that Nathaniel's grandfather had declared as moral position, and that required consequently genuine management of labor relations rather than compulsion. For 3 years, Eleanor had managed all of it, and she had done more than sustain. She had improved. Crop yields were up from 3 years prior. Tenant debt to the estate was down, not because she had forgiven it carelessly, but because she had restructured the arrangements to be more realistic, reducing default risk. She had negotiated a better rate with the Richmond grain merchant. She had redirected funds from his entertainment budget into repairs and improvements that had materially increased the estate's value. One afternoon he turned a page and found a notation in Eleanor's handwriting that stopped him cold. July 14, 1815. Redirected N's Richmond account balance to South Barn repair and West fence replacement. Informed steward, this was an approved allocation. N did not inquire. He sat with that sentence for a long time. N did not inquire. No, he had not. He had never noticed the money was different because he had never looked. He had assumed the accounts were fine because he had never looked at them closely enough to see that they weren't. And Eleanor. Eleanor had quietly redirected his money to fix his fences and repair his barns and strengthen his estate, and had noted it in the ledger with a professional flatness that was somehow more devastating than any accusation she might have written in its place. He turned more pages. March 3, 1866. Covered quarterly land tax from personal reserve. N's allocation insufficient. May 22, 1816. Renegotiated south parcel rent with Holt family. Reduced by 12% to reflect crop loss. N. Not consulted decision required immediate response. September 4, 1816. Transferred remaining personal reserve to estate general fund. Reserve now depleted. Cannot continue this method beyond 6 months without external resolution. That was the last notation of its kind. 6 months later. 6 months after she had written that sentence, after she had told herself in the precise language of a ledger that she had reached the limit of what she could give, she had gone to Carter. Not to build a case, not to punish him, to ask how much longer she could hold on. And Carter had told her she couldn't. And she had said, "Do what you must. I will manage." Nathaniel closed the ledger. He sat in Carter's office in the long summer afternoon, and he did something he had already done once on a Virginia road, which was weep but differently this time. Less raw, more specific. Not grief for himself, but for her. For the 3 years of her life, she had spent in quiet, competent, utterly unacknowledged work while he stood in Richmond parlors, talking about himself. Carter came in from the outer room and saw him and said nothing. Just set a glass of water on the desk and left again. Cha-cha. On a Thursday morning in late June, Nathaniel rode out to the west boundary of Sterling land. Not to the manor, not to the gate. To the fields, the working fields where the tenant farmers were 3 weeks into summer harvest preparation. Turning soil and clearing ditches, and doing the 100 small tasks that kept agricultural land productive. I didn't know exactly what he intended. He tied his horse at the fence post and walked into the field and found after a short while a man he recognized. James Holt, the father of the boy who had brought water through the gate. Holt was digging a drainage ditch near the edge of a cornfield, working alone, the kind of methodical physical labor that takes most of a morning and all of a man's concentration. He looked up when he heard Nathaniel approach, and his expression cycled through several things, quickly. Surprise, caution, calculation, before settling into a careful neutrality. "Mr. Sterling," Holt said. He did not put down his shovel. "Mr. Holt." Nathaniel stopped at a respectful distance. "Your boy brought me water last week. I wanted to say thank you." Holt regarded him. "Billy said you were polite about it. He was kind to offer. He's got his mother's instincts." A pause. "We heard you're staying in town." "At Mrs. Pruitt's, yes." Holt nodded slowly. He was not a man who filled silence unnecessarily. "You rode out here just to thank my boy." "No," Nathaniel said honestly. "I rode out here because I've been reading the estate ledgers, and I've been trying to understand what this land actually requires to run, and I realized I haven't had a conversation with a single working family on this property in—" He stopped. "I don't remember when." Holt looked at him for a long moment. Not with hostility. with the steady measuring appraisal of a man who has spent his life learning to read situations accurately because the cost of misreading them was too high. "The rent restructuring," Nathaniel said. "Mrs. Sterling arranged that with you. Last spring, yes. We had a bad season, lost near a third of the corn to the early frost. Old arrangement would have put us 2 quarters behind with no way to catch up." He paused. "She sat with my wife and me at the kitchen table, looked at our actual numbers, asked what was realistic, wrote it into a new agreement that same day, and had Carter register it proper." Another pause longer. "She didn't have to do it that way. She could have just told us what the new terms were, but she asked." "She asked?" "Yes." Holt looked at him steadily. "That's not common, Mr. Sterling. A woman in her position coming to a tenant's table and asking what was fair." Nathaniel was quiet. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He stayed another hour. They talked haltingly at first, then with more ease about the Southfield drainage, about the summer outlook, about what the Holt family needed in terms of equipment repair that had been pending for over a year. Nathaniel listened. He asked questions. He did not offer solutions he didn't have or make promises he couldn't keep. He just listened. When he left, Holt watched him go and said as he was mounting his horse, "She loves this land, Mr. Sterling, and the people on it. That's a thing worth knowing." "I know," Nathaniel said. "Knowing it now's better than never," Holt said. "But knowing it while you were here." He looked back at his ditch. "That would have been something different altogether." The news reached him on a Wednesday evening when he had been in town for 2.5 weeks. "I was in Carter's office working through a set of the older trust records when Carter came in from his afternoon meetings and sat down across from him with an expression that was carefully arranged but not quite controlled. "There's something you should know," Carter said. Nathaniel put down his pen. When a lawyer prefaced information with that particular tone, it was never something minor. "Victoria Hale," Carter said, "announced her engagement last week to Gerald Fenn." Nathaniel stared at him. Gerald Fenn was 54 years old. He owned the largest shipping concern in Richmond and had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. He had been widowed twice and was by general consensus not a man who married for sentiment. "She didn't wait long," Nathaniel said. "No." Carter watched him carefully. "I thought you should hear it from me rather than the street." Nathaniel sat with it. He waited for something, the hot rush of betrayal or jealousy or anger, the kind of feeling that would confirm that what he'd had with Victoria had been real, had been worth something, had meant something more than the series of expensive evenings he was still technically paying for. What he felt instead was something quieter and more final, something like clarity, because the anger didn't come. And in its absence he could see with the calm vision of a man who has had 2.5 weeks of Mrs. Pruitt's boarding house and ledger reading and conversations at tenant fences to think clearly in exactly what Victoria Hale had been to him. She had been a mirror. She had shown him the reflection. He wanted to see the sophisticated man, the man of the world, the man too complex for ordinary domestic life, and he had paid richly for that reflection without ever asking whether it was accurate. She had not lied to him. She had simply shown him what he brought her to show him, and he had mistaken the mirror for the truth. "Are you all right?" Carter asked. "Yes," Nathaniel said. And then, because Carter deserved honesty, not happy exactly, but clear. Clear about what? Nathaniel looked at the ledger open on the desk. Eleanor's handwriting, 3 years of her handwriting, careful and precise and utterly real. "About the difference between a woman who shows you who you want to be," he said slowly, "and a woman who sees who you actually are." He closed the ledger. "Victoria showed me a flattering picture. Eleanor knew me. The real me, the man who stopped doing his quarterly reviews, the man who didn't notice the accounts were wrong. She knew that man, and she stayed, and she covered for him, and she protected his home." His voice was level, but not easy. "I didn't deserve that, but I had it, and I gave it up for a mirror." Carter was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Nathaniel stood up and put on his hat. "I'm going to earn my way back to that ledger," he said. "Starting tomorrow. I want to take over the Eastfield accounts, the ones that are open for the fall season. I'll work under the estate steward until he's satisfied I know what I'm doing. I'm not asking for the title back. I'm not asking for anything. I'm going to do the work." He picked up his coat. "And if 2 years from now Eleanor decides it isn't enough, then it still will have been the right thing to do." Carter looked at him for a long moment. "Your father," he said something similar to me once, 30 years ago, when he was trying to turn the estate around after a bad decade." He paused. He was 31 years old. "I'm 34, Nathaniel said. "Yes," Carter said. "But you know something he didn't starting out." "What's that?" "You know what you lost. He was starting from nothing. You're starting from grief." The lawyer picked up his pen. "In my experience, grief is a better teacher than nothing, if you'll let it be." He let Margaret Whitmore know he was taking up the Eastfield accounts. He didn't ask her to tell Eleanor. He just told her because she was Eleanor's honest messenger, and because Eleanor deserved to know what he was doing without having to hear it from a stranger. Margaret's reply came 4 days later, shorter than the first. "She knows." She said nothing. That is not the same as not noticing. He pinned that letter to the wall above his desk. Then he went to work. The summer of 1817 turned hot and long and unrelenting, the way Virginia summers do when they mean it. Nathaniel spent his mornings in the fields, and his afternoons with the accounts, and his evenings in the boarding house, going over what he'd learned and what he didn't yet understand. He made mistakes more than he expected, more than he was comfortable making, in front of the estate steward, a weathered man named Graves, who had been managing Sterling land for 15 years, and had Nathaniel suspected a very precise and very private opinion of the man who was supposed to be his employer. Graves never said it. He just corrected mistakes without ceremony, explained things once and clearly, and made it obvious by his manner that competence was the only currency he respected. By the end of July, Nathaniel was competent at the Eastfield accounts. Not expert, not within sight of Eleanor's meticulous command of the whole estate, but competent. Getting better. On a Tuesday morning in early August, he was working at the field boundary when he saw at a distance a figure walking the opposite boundary of the same field. A woman in a light dress moving along the fence line, stopping occasionally to look at something or write in a small book she carried. He recognized her immediately. Every angle of her. The way she walked, unhurried but purposeful, the walk of someone who knew exactly where they were going and why. Eleanor. She was checking the Eastfield boundary. His field. He stood very still and watched her, and she did not look in his direction, or if she did, it was a glance too quick to hold. And after perhaps 10 minutes, she completed her inspection and walked back toward the manor house and disappeared into the summer distance. He stood there for a long time after she was gone. He had not called out. She had not looked. But they had both been in the same field on opposite sides of it on the same morning, doing the same work. Graves came up beside him and looked at the empty field and said not unkindly, "She checks that boundary every Tuesday. She has done since spring." He looked at Nathaniel sideways. "Since about the time you started on the accounts." Nathaniel said nothing. "Just so you know," Graves said, and walked away. He stood in the August heat and looked at the fence line where she had walked, and he thought of the boy who had brought water through iron bars, and Holt at the drainage ditch, saying that would have been something different altogether, and Carter saying grief is a better teacher than nothing, and Eleanor's letter notation N did not inquire, written in the careful handwriting of a woman doing her husband's job, while her husband was somewhere else admiring his own reflection. I was not across the field anymore. He was not across the gate. But the distance between them was still real, and he had no idea how wide it truly was. And the only thing he knew, the only thing he was certain of in that hot August field, was that closing it, whatever it cost, whatever it took, however long it required, was the only work that mattered. He picked up his ledger. He went back to work. The invitation arrived on a Saturday. Not to Nathaniel. To the entire county. He heard about it from Fowler at the breakfast table. The merchant had a letter from a business associate in Richmond, and he read the relevant passage aloud, with the cheerful tactlessness that was, Nathaniel had come to understand, simply the man's natural mode of existing in the world. "Harrington Estate is throwing a grand summer gathering," Fowler announced, buttering his bread with enthusiasm. "Last weekend of August. The Harringtons, the Beaumont family, the Aldridge crowd from Fredericksburg. He paused. Sterling Manor is listed as a sponsoring household. The table went quiet. Nathaniel looked up from his coffee. Sterling Manor, he repeated. Eleanor Sterling listed as hostess representative. Fowler seemed to realize approximately 3 seconds too late that this information might carry weight. He lowered his bread. I reckon that's well. She's running the estate, ain't she? She is, Nathaniel said. He set down his coffee. He kept his face even. But something had shifted in his chest. Not jealousy, not anger. Something more complicated than either. Eleanor was moving. Eleanor was visible. Eleanor was walking into the county's social world, not as Nathaniel Sterling's wife, but as Sterling Manor's representative on her own terms in her own right. She didn't need him there. She hadn't needed him for a long time. That night alone in his boarding house room, Nathaniel sat with that understanding and felt it settle into him like a stone into water. The rings spread wide and then stilled. How was working the Eastfield accounts on a Wednesday morning, 12 days before the Harrington gathering, when Graves came to find him with an expression that meant news. Rider from Richmond, Graves said. Came to the manor first, then they sent him on to you. Nathaniel straightened. Who? Man named Prescott. Says he knew you from the city. Nathaniel knew the name immediately. Robert Prescott, one of the Richmond set, a man who moved in the same circles Nathaniel had inhabited for 2 years. The kind of man who attended every gathering and knew every piece of social information approximately 48 hours before anyone else. Prescott was waiting at the road mounted dressed for travel, with the slightly breathless energy of someone carrying information he considered urgent. Nathaniel, he said without preamble, I came because I thought you should know before the gathering. Know what? Prescott glanced toward the manor house, then back. Victoria Hale has accepted an invitation to the Harrington event. The summer air seemed to thicken. She's coming here, Nathaniel said, with Gerald Fenn. They're presenting as an established couple. Prescott shifted in his saddle. And there's something else. She's been talking, Nathaniel, in Richmond, telling a version of things that isn't. He stopped. She's saying this marriage was already finished before she entered the picture, that Eleanor had been difficult, that you confided in her about problems in the marriage. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. That's not true. I know that, but she's been saying it to people who don't know better, and some of them are coming to the Harrington gathering. Prescott looked at him directly. I thought you should hear it first, because whatever Eleanor hears, and she will hear it, someone always tells the wife she's going to hear it among company. After Prescott rode away, Nathaniel stood on the road for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at the manor house. Eleanor was in there, going about her work managing accounts, preparing for a public gathering at which the woman who had helped dismantle her marriage was going to appear and tell lies about her to people who would smile and nod and carry the story home. He made a decision. He walked to the manor gate, rang the bell, and asked Thomas to carry a message to Mrs. Sterling. Eleanor, I need 5 minutes. Not to ask for anything. There is information you need before the Harrington gathering, and you should hear it from me. I will wait at the gate. Thomas looked at the note and looked at him and went inside. Nathaniel waited. 20 minutes passed. Then Eleanor came to the gate. She looked, he thought, exactly like herself, which was to say, she looked like someone who had been interrupted in the middle of work. She considered important and had come anyway because the note had indicated it mattered. She was not warm. She was not cold. She was simply present the way Eleanor always was, fully without performance. 5 minutes, she said. Victoria Hale is attending the Harrington gathering, he said, with Gerald Fenn, and she's been telling people in Richmond that the marriage was already over before she was involved, that you were difficult, that I confided problems in her. Eleanor's expression didn't shift. That was the thing about her that had once frustrated him and now struck him as one of the most formidable things he had ever witnessed. She received information without performing a reaction to it. She processed it somewhere behind those steady eyes. I see, she said. It's not true, he said. None of it. And people coming to that gathering are going to have heard it, and someone is going to tell you in front of others. And I didn't want you to be blindsided." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you," she said. "Just that. No warmth, no coldness. Honest acknowledgement. Eleanor." He stopped. He had told himself he wasn't going to ask for anything. He had meant it. "Do you want me there at the gathering? I'm not asking to accompany you. I'm asking if my presence would make things harder or easier. If easier, I'll come. If harder, I'll stay away. That's all." She was quiet. A long, genuine quiet, the kind that came from actual thought rather than drama. "Stay away," she said at last. "Not because your presence would hurt me, because this is something I need to do alone." She looked at him steadily. "I have been doing things alone for 3 years, Nathaniel. I know how." "I know you do," he said. "That's not something I'll ever forget." She turned to go, then she stopped. "The Eastfield account for September," she said without turning around. "The notation on the Tillman lease you caught an error from 2 years ago that had been rolling forward. Graves told me." A pause. "That was good work." She walked back to the house. He stood at the gate holding those 4 words like something fragile. That was good work. The last weekend of August came hot and heavy. The way August in Virginia always ended, the kind of heat that didn't break even at night, that made sleep difficult and tempers short, and every small thing feel slightly more consequential than it actually was. Nathaniel spent that Saturday at the boarding house. He had made himself a promise, and he intended to keep it. He worked on accounts in the morning, ate dinner quietly with Fowler and the school teacher Aldous, and did not go to the Harrington estate. But the county was small, and the Harrington gathering was large, and by Sunday morning he knew everything that had happened. Mrs. Pruitt told him most of it, with the carefully arranged neutrality of a woman who was absolutely certain of her facts, and wanted him to understand that she was not editorializing. Victoria Hale arrived with Mr. Fenn, she said, setting his breakfast coffee down with the particular deliberateness of someone managing information delivery. She was wearing well. She dressed to be noticed, and she was. A pause. She spent the first hour making the rounds and telling people within earshot of various guests, not directly. You understand the way a clever woman manages these things, telling people that she had simply been a comfort to you during a difficult time in your marriage. That Eleanor had been withdrawn, cold, more interested in the estate than in her husband. Nathaniel said nothing. Eleanor arrived an hour after the gathering started. Mrs. Pruitt continued. She came with Margaret Whitmore. She wore gray, which some people thought was odd for a summer gathering, but I think she knew what she was doing. She looked serious. She looked like a woman who belonged to herself. Mrs. Pruitt poured her own coffee and sat from him, which she had never done before. There was a moment about 2 hours in when Victoria Hale crossed the room to speak to Eleanor directly. Nathaniel set down his fork. Mrs. Hale said again, I am telling you what 3 separate people told me, so I am confident in the substance. She said something to the effect of, Mrs. Sterling, I want you to know I bear you no ill will. Whatever happened between Nathaniel and myself, I hope you understand. It was never my intention to cause you pain. What did Eleanor say? Mrs. Pruitt's expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile, but lived in its neighborhood. She said, Miss Hale, I don't think about you enough to bear you ill will. A real pause for effect. And then she turned back to the conversation she had been having before she was interrupted. Nathaniel stared at her. Then, Mrs. Pruitt continued, Richard Harrington, the host, you know he sits on the County Land Committee. He asked Eleanor publicly whether the Sterling estate would be increasing its harvest allocation to the Richmond market this year. A business question, in front of everyone. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Eleanor answered for 20 minutes. Every figure correct. Every projection laid out clearly. She talked about the East Field yields, the South parcel, restructuring the renegotiated grain rates. She looked at him steadily. She knew every number, every detail. The men around her were taking notes. I understood what had happened. Eleanor had walked into a room where someone was telling lies about her, had dismissed that someone with 4 words, and had then demonstrated to every person of consequence in the county that she was the most capable estate manager in the room. She hadn't defended herself. She had simply been herself. Mr. Harrington shook her hand at the end. Mrs. Pruitt added, said Sterling Manor was an example to the whole county, said whatever challenges the estate had faced recently. And here Mrs. Pruitt's eyes were very precise. Clearly hadn't affected the quality of its management. No, Nathaniel said quietly. They hadn't. Whatever challenges the estate faced, Mrs. Pruitt said, had been weathered by a capable woman. She stood and picked up her cup. Victoria Hale left early, with Mr. Fenn. They had apparently planned to stay the night but changed their plans. She went back to the kitchen. Nathaniel sat at the table in the boarding house and felt something he hadn't expected to feel on a Sunday morning: pride. Not his own pride. Not the old reflexive pride of ownership. Pride in Eleanor. In who she was. In the way she had walked into that room and handled herself with an economy and a dignity that he recognized, seeing it described as something he had never once in 5 years of marriage truly appreciated. He had been living next to extraordinary and had not known it. On Monday morning, a second letter came from Margaret. It was longer than the others. Mr. Sterling, Eleanor asked me not to write this. I am writing it anyway because I believe she deserves for someone to say it plainly, and she is too principled to say it herself. At the gathering on Saturday after the business discussion that I assume someone has already told you about, Eleanor stepped away from the main group for a moment. I followed her because I have known her for 15 years, and I know what her face looks like when she is holding something she hasn't let herself feel yet. She stood at the window for about 2 minutes. She was not crying. Eleanor almost never cries. But she had the look she gets when something costs her, the look I first saw when her father died, and again on her wedding day. Though I didn't understand then what it meant. I asked her what she was thinking. She said, I keep waiting for it to stop feeling like grief. I don't know when it will. I asked what she meant. She said, I know who he is now. I know he's doing the work. I know he means it. And I still don't know if it's enough. I don't know if I can open that gate, Maggie. Not because I don't want to, because I don't know who I would be if I did and it went wrong again. I am telling you this, not to give you hope that you don't deserve, nor to punish you with information that is too painful to act on. I am telling you because Eleanor is one of the finest women I have ever known, and she is hurting, and you are the reason, and you should know exactly the shape of what you did. She is not waiting for you to rescue her. She is building her own life with her own hands. Whether there is a door left open in that life is something only she can answer. M. Whitmore. He read it twice, then a third time. Then he sat down at his desk and wrote, not to Eleanor, not to Margaret, but to Carter. I need to understand the petition process for accelerated review, not to rush the 2 years. I understand what the 2 years are for, but I want to know if there is anything additional I can do. Any documentation, any formal accounting of conduct, any way to build a record that speaks clearly. I want to do this correctly. Tell me what correctly looks like. Carter replied by the following morning. Come to the office Thursday. Bring the Eastfield accounts. We have work to do. Thursday came, and with it a piece of news that Nathaniel had not anticipated, and that landed with the force of something dropped from a height. I was halfway through the meeting with Carter. They were building a formal documentation framework for the petition, a structured account of the work Nathaniel had done, and was doing complete with ledger citations and witness statements from Graves and Holt. When Carter looked up from his papers with the expression of a man about to say something difficult. There's a development you need to know about, Carter said. Tell me. A man named Aldridge, from Fredericksburg. The family was at the Harrington gathering. Franklin Aldridge. He is... Carter paused, choosing his words. He is a widower of 2 years, 43 years old, respected family, legitimate business interests. He approached me last week on a matter of... Another pause. He asked whether Eleanor Sterling's personal situation was in his word settled. The room was very quiet. He's asking about her, Nathaniel said. He is interested in knowing whether she is available, Carter said carefully. He was careful to do it properly through a lawyer, discreetly, not to Eleanor directly. He is not a man who acts without consideration. Nathaniel looked at the ledger on the desk in front of him. Eleanor's handwriting. N did not inquire. What did you tell him? He asked. I told him that Mrs. Sterling's situation was a private matter and that any communication would need to be addressed through her directly. Carter looked at him steadily. I told him nothing more because it was not my place. She's still my wife, Nathaniel said. The words came out with more force than he intended. Legally, yes, Carter said. But Nathaniel, he set down his pen. You need to understand something. Eleanor has done nothing wrong. She is a young woman, 27 years old, who has been living in an ambiguous situation for 3 months in a marriage that was by any reasonable measure already broken before you left. She is not obligated to wait. He was quiet for a moment. She may choose to wait. She may choose not to. But she has the right to make that choice freely, and your presence in the East Field does not remove that right. Nathaniel looked at his hands. No, he said, it doesn't. What are you going to do? He thought about Eleanor at the Harrington window. Margaret's letter. I don't know who I would be if I did, and it went wrong again. He thought about the locked gate and the tin cup of water and 31 months of quarterly reviews he hadn't done. He thought about 3 pages of ledger notation in her careful handwriting documenting everything he had failed to notice. I'm going to keep doing the work, he said. And then I'm going to talk to her. Not to ask her to choose, not to ask her to wait. He looked at Carter directly. To tell her the truth. That I understand now what I had. That I understand what it cost her. That if she chooses Aldridge or anyone else, I will not make her life harder for it. But that I am not going to disappear, because disappearing is what I already did once, and it was the worst decision I ever made. Carter was quiet for a long moment. When, he said. When I can say all of that without needing anything back from her, Nathaniel said. When I can say it and mean it and walk away if that's what she needs. He picked up his pen. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. Carter nodded once. Then let's build the petition document. They worked for 3 more hours. September arrived and brought the first hint of cooler air from the north, the kind that made mornings bearable and evenings almost pleasant. The fields were deep into harvest preparation. The Holt family's corn came in strong, better than the prior year, by a margin that made Holt. When Nathaniel saw him at the field boundary shake his head with the gratified disbelief of a farmer who has been given back something he expected to lose. Good year, Holt said simply. Good management, Nathaniel said. Your management, the family's work. Holt looked at him sideways. The rent restructure helped. Eleanor's decision. Yours to recognize, Holt said. Giving credit where it's due is a kind of management too, Mr. Sterling. Nathaniel filed that away. How was filing a great many things away? Now, small observations, small moments of understanding that accumulated like deposits in an account he was slowly building. Not the account in Carter's ledger. The other kind. The kind that couldn't be documented in legal language, but that was perhaps the only account that ultimately mattered. How was becoming someone he could respect, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and frustrations and mornings when he looked in the small mirror in his boarding house room and couldn't fully reconcile the man looking back with either the man he had been or the man he was trying to become. But he was becoming. And then on a Tuesday morning in the second week of September, something happened that unmade every careful plan he had built. Howe was at the East Field boundary at his usual time, reviewing the harvest numbers with Graves when he heard horses on the Manor Road moving faster than ordinary business required. 2 riders, going toward the house. Graves looked up. Something in the quality of the rider's speed made both men pause. Rider from Richmond, Graves said quietly, his voice carrying the instinctive knowledge of a man who had worked this land long enough to recognize when something was wrong. That's not a social call. Nathaniel set down his ledger. 10 minutes later, Thomas came through the field gate at a pace that confirmed it. Mr. Sterling. Thomas's face was controlled but tight. There's been a legal challenge filed against the estate in Richmond. What kind of challenge? A creditor claim. A man named Drummond says he holds a promissory note signed by you in your name, not the estate's name, but he's claiming it represents an estate obligation. Thomas paused. He's filed for seizure of estate assets pending resolution. The court has issued a temporary hold on all Sterling property transfers. Everything in Nathaniel's chest went very cold and very still. When was this note signed? He said. 18 months ago. Richmond. Drummond's a moneylender operates just inside the legal line from what Mr. Carter is saying. Thomas looked at him steadily without accusation. Mr. Carter is already riding to the courthouse. But Mrs. Sterling, is she all right? She's... Thomas stopped. Chose his word carefully. She's managing, sir. But the claim, if it holds, would freeze the estate accounts. Workers can't be paid. The Holt family's new rent agreement would be in dispute. All the fall market contracts Eleanor negotiated, all of it on hold. He paused. She's in the study right now, going through every piece of paper in the estate. Nathaniel was already moving toward the gate. Thomas, he said, his voice lower and harder than it had been in months. Tell Mrs. Sterling I'm at the gate. Tell her I remember signing that note. Tell her I know exactly what it covers, and I believe I can dispute the claim. He stopped. Tell her I'm not asking to come in. I'm asking for 10 minutes of her time because this is my fault and I know how to fix it. Thomas looked at him. You remember the note, Thomas said. I remember everything now, Nathaniel said. That's the problem with paying attention. You remember things you can't afford to have forgotten. Thomas went. Nathaniel stood at the gate. He had stood at this gate before, lost and ashamed, on a hot summer morning, with a legal document in his hands and no understanding of how he'd arrived there. He stood at it again now, and the gate was still locked, and the summer was thinning toward fall, and inside the house, Eleanor was going through papers trying to protect what she had built from the consequences of what he had broken. This time, he was not lost. Howe was furious at himself, at Drummond, at the 18-month-old version of himself, who had signed that note without thinking, who had treated money as something that existed in infinite supply, as long as he didn't look too closely at the columns. But beneath the fury was something else. Something that had not been there 3 months ago, outside a locked gate in the summer heat with dust on his coat and no idea who he was. Purpose. He knew something. He could do something specific. He could stand at this gate and be useful, not as a husband, not as a title, not as a name, but as a man who had made a specific mistake and knew the specific shape of how to address it. The gate opened. Not wide. Just enough for a person. Eleanor stood in the gap. She was holding a sheaf of papers. She looked like someone who had been interrupted in the middle of a crisis and had come anyway because the message had said, "This is my fault and I know how to fix it." She looked at him. "Tell me about the note," she said. And Nathaniel Sterling stepped toward the gate, not through it, not yet, just closer, and began to speak. "Tell me about the note," Eleanor said, and Nathaniel told her. Not the polished version. Not the version that made him look like a man who had simply made an understandable error in a complicated situation. The true version. All of it, start to finish, with the particular exhausted clarity of a man who had spent 3 months learning that the only thing he had left worth offering was honesty. The note had been signed 18 months ago in Richmond, at a dinner that had started as a business meeting and ended as something else entirely. Drummond, a man who operated 3 blocks from respectability in every direction, had presented the note as a formality. A bridge loan, he'd called it. 30 days. To cover a gap in the quarterly accounts that Nathaniel had known somewhere in the part of his mind he was not consulting at the time, was not actually a gap in the quarterly accounts, but a deficit he had created by redirecting funds to his Richmond life. He had signed it. He had not told Eleanor. He had not told Carter. He had, in the manner of a man who has decided that problems he doesn't look at directly, aren't fully real, simply put it in a drawer and told himself he would address it when the quarter settled. The quarter had not settled. The next one hadn't either. And Drummond, who was exactly the kind of man who kept careful track of exactly these things, had waited with the patience of someone who understood that compounding interest and escalating legal leverage were more reliable than confrontation. 30 days became 18 months, Eleanor said. It was not a question. Yes. And the amount? He told her. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then opened them. That's manageable, she said. It's not what it could have been. She looked at the papers in her hand. Drummond is claiming estate liability, which he doesn't have. The note is in your personal name. Carter can argue personal obligations separate from estate assets. The court hold is aggressive, but it's not, it can be challenged. I know, Nathaniel said. I have documentation from the Richmond merchant who witnessed the signing. He can confirm the terms as stated. Drummond has altered the repayment language, I'm certain of it. The original note specified 30 days with a fixed rate. What he filed with the court has a compounding structure that wasn't in the document I signed. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. He altered the document. That's my belief. I can't prove it yet. But the witness was a man named Carver, Henry Carver, dry goods merchant on Broad Street. He was there. He'll remember the terms. She was quiet for a moment. The gate was still only open by the width of a person. Neither of them had moved. You remembered his name, she said. I remember everything now, he said. Like I told Thomas. The problem with paying attention is that you start remembering things you can't afford to have forgotten. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not softness, not distance, something in the narrow territory between them that he was learning very slowly to stop trying to name. Come in, she said. She stepped back. We need to work. He followed her through the gate. He had not been inside it since the morning he left. They worked in the east parlor, the room Eleanor used as her office. Not the formal parlor his mother had maintained for guests, but the working room with account books stacked on every flat surface, and Carter's correspondence organized in neat piles, and a map of the estate properties pinned to the wall with notes in Eleanor's handwriting annotating each parcel. She sat across the table from him for the first time in 3 months and spread the estate documents between them, and they worked. And it was nothing like the conversations he had rehearsed in his boarding house room, and everything like the early years of their marriage when they had sat across tables in exactly this way and been without either of them fully recognizing it good partners. He told her everything he remembered about the Drummond note. She wrote it down with the precise shorthand of someone who had learned to capture information quickly. She asked questions, sharp, specific, financially sophisticated questions, that told him she had been managing these kinds of problems for long enough that she recognized the shape of this one. Drummond has done this before, she said. Carter will know. He has a reputation for this specific method extend weight alter claim. Can we prove the alteration? Henry Carver's testimony is the key. She set down her pen. Can you get him to Richmond before the court date? 10 days, he said. I can have Carver's statement in Carter's hands in 10 days if I rides tomorrow. She looked at him directly. You're willing to ride to Richmond? I'll leave at dawn. He held her gaze. Eleanor, this is my debt. My mistake. I am not going to sit at a boarding house while you fight it. She was quiet. Then she said, You'll need a letter from Carter establishing your authority to act on the estate's behalf in this matter. Since you're no longer the primary trustee, Drummond's lawyers will challenge your standing otherwise. Will Carter write it? I'll ask him to. She looked down at the papers. I'll ask him tonight. I understood what that meant. She was giving him something, not forgiveness, not the gate opened wide, but something real and specific and earned. She was treating him as a person whose action mattered, as a partner in a problem, even a problem he had created. Thank you, he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, don't thank me, fix it. Carter arrived 2 hours later, rode straight to the manor when he received Eleanor's message and spent the first 15 minutes in the east parlor going through the documents with the focused intensity of a man who had spent the better part of the day in a courthouse learning the shape of the problem and was now grateful to have people who could help him address it. He looked at Nathaniel across the table. You're certain Carver was present? Certain. And you're certain the repayment language was altered? I kept a copy. Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket and placed a folded paper on the table. I took it out of the drawer I'd been not looking at for 18 months, 3 months ago when I started going through everything. I kept it because I didn't know what it meant at the time, but it didn't match my memory of the agreement. Carter unfolded it. He read it. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes went very still. This is materially different from what he filed, Carter said quietly. Yes. Carter looked at Eleanor, then back at Nathaniel. This is fraud, not an aggressive legal strategy. Fraud. I know. If Carver confirms the original terms, he will. Then Drummond doesn't just lose the claim, he faces criminal exposure. Carter folded the paper back. Why did you keep this? Nathaniel looked at the document in Carter's hand. Because even when I was at my worst, he said slowly, I knew something felt wrong about it. I just wasn't in a state of mind where I was willing to look at things that felt wrong. He paused. I'm in that state of mind now. The room was quiet. Then Eleanor said to Carter, write the letter of authority. He rides at dawn. Carter looked at her for a moment, the look of a man who had watched two people from a professional distance for years and was adjusting something in his understanding of what he was seeing. Yes, he said. I'll write it tonight. Nathaniel rode to Richmond the next morning and was back in 9 days. He came back with Henry Carver's signed statement, notarized before a Richmond magistrate, confirming the original terms of the promissory note in precise and unambiguous language that made Drummond's filed version look exactly like what it was. He also came back with 3 additional witness statements, men who had been in Drummond's orbit long enough to have their own grievances, who had been waiting for someone to give them legal cover to say what they knew. Carter had suggested the night before Nathaniel left that if Drummond had done this before, there would be others. Nathaniel had found them. He arrived at Carter's office on a Thursday afternoon, dusty from the road, and placed the documents on the desk. Carter read through them without speaking. You found 4 witnesses, he said at last. Carver plus 3 others, all signed, all notarized. Drummond's lawyers are going to fold, Carter said. This isn't a negotiation anymore. This is... He shook his head. You did this in 9 days. I had a reason to move fast, Nathaniel said. Carter looked at him over the documents. She's still managing the estate. I know. She didn't stop working while you were gone. She's been here every day. He paused. She asked me on Wednesday, she asked whether you had sent word from Richmond. Nathaniel stopped. She asked about me. She asked whether you had sent word. Carter repeated carefully. Whether the Carver meeting had gone as expected. Whether the timeline was holding. He set down the documents. She asked practically, but she asked. Nathaniel sat down. He had been in Richmond for 9 days, sleeping in a cramped inn room, chasing down witnesses, working with the controlled urgency of a man who understood that every day the court hold remained in place was a day Eleanor couldn't pay wages or fulfill contracts. He had been focused entirely on the task, not on what the task might mean, not on whether doing it constituted something beyond fixing a problem he had caused. She asked, he said again quietly. Practically, Carter said firmly. Then after a pause with less firmness, though I will say practical questions can carry more than they appear to. The court ruled 12 days later. Drummond's claim was dismissed. The altered document was entered into the official record as evidence of fraud. The Virginia court issued a formal censure and referred the matter to the county magistrate for criminal review. The estate hold was lifted completely with a letter of apology from the court clerk that Carter said was unusual enough to frame. Carter sent word to Sterling Manor first, then to the boarding house. Nathaniel received his letter, read it, sat with it for approximately 2 minutes, and then did something he hadn't done since the summer began. He went to the manor gate and rang the bell and asked Thomas when he appeared to tell Mrs. Sterling that the matter was resolved and that he was there if she wanted to know the details and that he had no other business and would not intrude if she was occupied. He waited. Thomas came back in 4 minutes. Mrs. Sterling will see you in the east parlor, sir. And then, for the first time since a June morning when he had stood at this gate with dust on his coat and a legal document in his hand, Thomas unlocked the chain. The gate swung open, not as wide as it used to open when he lived here. Just enough, but enough. Eleanor was standing when he came in, not sitting, the posture of someone who had arranged themselves for a conversation rather than settling in for a long one. She had the court letter already in her hand. Carter must have sent a rider to the manor and the boarding house simultaneously. Carter's letter came an hour ago, she said. Mine came this morning. She set the letter down on the table. 4 witnesses. You found 4 witnesses in 9 days. Drummond had been doing this for years, Nathaniel said. People were waiting for someone to make it safe to say so. You made it safe. Carter's legal framework made it safe. I just found the people. She looked at him steadily. You could have sent someone else, a hired agent. Carter could have arranged it. I know. Why did you go yourself? Howe was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to say it correctly, not in the way that asked for something back, not in the way that performed emotion for effect, but in the plain, honest language of a man who had spent 3 months learning that plain honesty was the only currency with actual value. Because it was my debt, he said. My error. My name on the document. He met her eyes. And because you have been cleaning up after my errors for 3 years, and I decided in June that I was done letting you do that alone. Even for the ones I can't undo. The ones I can address, I'm going to address. Myself. In person. Whatever it takes. She looked at him for a long time. Sit down, Nathaniel, she said. They sat across from each other at the east parlor table, and outside the windows, the September light was doing what September light does in Virginia, going gold and long and slightly melancholy. The way it does when summer is ending and the year is beginning to mean something different. Margaret told me, Eleanor said, about the Aldridge inquiry. He had known she would eventually. He hadn't brought it up himself because it wasn't his to bring. Yes. She shouldn't have told you. She thought I should know the shape of things. He paused. She was right. Eleanor folded her hands on the table. It was a gesture he remembered the particular way she composed herself when she was about to say something she had thought through carefully. I didn't encourage him, Mr. Aldridge. I haven't responded to the inquiry. You don't owe me an explanation for that. I know I don't. She looked at him directly. I'm telling you because I want to be honest with you. Because honesty it's the only thing that makes any of this make sense to me right now. She paused. I didn't encourage him because I'm not. I haven't decided anything about any of it. And I don't think it's honest to allow a man to invest interest in a situation that isn't settled. The room was very quiet. Is it settling? Nathaniel asked. His voice came out lower than he intended. The situation. She looked at him, and he could see it again. The thing that had moved through her eyes at the gate 3 months ago too fast to name. Only now it moved more slowly, and he had more time to watch it, and what he saw was not warmth exactly, and not coldness exactly, but the expression of a woman who was feeling something real, and was not yet certain what to do with it. I don't know, she said. I know you're different. I've been watching you for 3 months, and I know it's real. The accounts, the tenants, the Richmond trip, it's real. I'm not questioning that. She paused. What I'm questioning is whether real change is enough. Whether trust once it's been... She stopped. Started again. I trusted you completely, Nathaniel. Not in a naive way. I was not a foolish girl. I chose to trust you because I saw who you were, and I believed in that person. And then I watched that person disappear by degrees, and I told myself for a long time that he would come back. He did, Nathaniel said quietly. I did. Yes. Her voice was steady, but not easy. But I'm a different person than I was when you left. 3 years of managing this estate alone, of covering debts I didn't make, of sitting in that study with the account books at midnight, wondering whether the south parcel would hold, that changed me. I'm not the woman who stood at the church and believed the future was simple. She looked at him with complete honesty. I don't know if the woman I am now and the man you're becoming. I don't know if those two people fit together the way we once fit together. And I am not willing to find out at the cost of everything I've built. He had expected something like this. He had prepared himself for it. Told himself in the boarding house room, told Carter. Told himself on the Richmond road that he would hear whatever she needed to say and not make it harder by needing something back. He held to that. That's fair, he said. That's completely fair. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking you to decide anything. I'm not asking you to open the gate all the way, or to take me back, or to make any promise about the future. I'm asking for one thing, Eleanor, and it's the same thing I've been asking for since June. Which is, the chance to keep doing the work, he said. Not for the estate, Not for the petition, or the trust, or the legal process. For you. So that the woman you've become, whoever she is now, whatever she needs, she has the option. If she wants it. If it ever makes sense. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me be trustworthy and see what you think. The gold afternoon light moved across the table between them. Eleanor looked at her hands, then at him, then at the account book stacked at the edge of the table, the ledgers that documented 3 years of her life, her work, her choices. The Southfield harvest numbers, she said at last. Graves says you caught an error in the Tillman account in September, a compounding calculation that had been wrong for 2 years. Yes, that error, if it had continued, would have underpaid Tillman by roughly 14% over a 5-year period. She paused. He's one of our longest-standing tenants. His family has been on Sterling land for 22 years. I know that now, Nathaniel said. I didn't know it 3 months ago. No. She was quiet. When you found the error, what did you do? I corrected it in the ledger, calculated the underpayment, brought it to Graves, told him the Tillman family was owed a credit. He paused. Graves said that was he said Mrs. Sterling would want to know. He told me. Did he tell you what I said when he told me the Tillmans had been on this land for 22 years? She shook her head slightly. I said, Nathaniel said slowly, that I was ashamed I didn't know that a family had been here longer than I'd been alive, and I couldn't have named them from memory. He looked at her directly. Graves said Mrs. Sterling could name every family on this land and their children's names besides. And I said I knew. And I said that was the difference between someone who managed an estate and someone who understood it. The room was very quiet. Then Eleanor said very quietly, He didn't tell me that part. No, Nathaniel said. I didn't ask him to. She stood up from the table, not abruptly, with the deliberateness of someone who needed to move to do something with the weight of the moment. She walked to the window, stood there for a moment with her back to him. The petition review, she said. Carter says you've been building the documentation. Yes. The 2-year minimum. She turned around. You've been at it since June, which means the earliest possible petition date is next June. That's correct. And the process requires my presence at the council review, not my support, my presence. Yes. She looked at him with an expression he finally had a word for. It was not warmth, and it was not cold, and it was not undecided. It was considering. The expression of a woman who was genuinely carefully, with full intelligence and full awareness of what was at stake, considering. I will be there, she said. At the council review, when the time comes. I am not going to let 2 years of genuine work be dismissed because I refuse to show up. She paused. That is not a promise about the future, Nathaniel. It is not a door opened. It is... She searched for the word. It is what's fair, and I have always tried to do what's fair even when it was difficult. He stood up. He didn't move toward her. He just stood. Thank you, he said. And then, because he had promised himself honesty, I know what that cost you to say. Yes, she agreed. You would. Now. She picked up the court letter from the table. The Drummond matter is settled. The estate accounts are clear. I'll need you to meet with Carter next week to sign off on the personal debt resolution. It needs to be formally separated from the estate record. I'll be there. And the October harvest accounts, Graves says you're ready to handle the full yield documentation this season. He wouldn't say that if he didn't mean it. Graves doesn't say things he doesn't mean. Neither do you, Nathaniel said. Something moved through her face then, quick and honest and real. No, she said. I don't. He walked toward the door of the east parlor. At the threshold he stopped. Eleanor, he said. She looked at him. The Eastfield boundary, Tuesday mornings. She was very still. I know you check it every Tuesday, he said. I know you've done it since I started on the accounts. I'm not asking why. I just want you to know that on the Tuesday mornings when I see you on the other side of the field. He stopped. Those are the mornings I do the best work. He walked out. Behind him in the east, parlor in the gold. September light. Eleanor Sterling stood very still and held a court letter, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Something she didn't have a clean name for. Something that lived in the particular territory between grief and hope, where the truest things always seem to make their home. She stood there for a long moment. Then she sat back down at the table and opened the account book and went back to work. Ta-tang! October brought the full harvest, and with it the busiest season Sterling Manor had seen in 3 years. Nathaniel worked alongside Graves through all of it. The yield documentation, the market coordination, the tenant payment, reconciliations, the equipment inventory that revealed 3 items in urgent need of replacement that he flagged to Carter without being asked. He was at the fields before dawn most mornings, and at the accounts in the evening. And he slept soundly in his boarding house room in a way he hadn't managed in the spring. The sleep of a man whose hours were full of legitimate work. The county noticed. It was impossible not to notice in a community this size that Nathaniel Sterling, the man who had been sitting outside his own locked gate in June, was now the man the estate steward consulted on yield numbers, whose name appeared on documented tenant negotiations alongside his wife's, who had ridden to Richmond on a fraud matter and come back with 4 witnesses and a court censure. People adjusted, not all at once, not with any particular drama, but in the way small communities adjust to new information, gradually, practically the way you adjust to a change in weather. The careful courtesy at Mrs. Pruitt's breakfast table became something warmer. Holt nodded to him on the road with a different weight in it. The schoolteacher Aldous stopped carefully avoiding conversation and started including him in discussions about county matters, as though he was a person of interest and standing, which Nathaniel understood he was becoming. Not because of the Sterling name, not because of anything inherited, because of October yield numbers and a Richmond trip and a fraud case and Tuesday mornings in a field. He ran into Franklin Aldridge in November. The Fredericksburg man was passing through the county on business, legitimate business, from the look of it, the straightforward commerce of a man with wide interests and efficient habits. He came into Carter's office on a Thursday morning when Nathaniel was reviewing the petition documentation, and the 2 men occupied the same waiting room for approximately 4 minutes before Carter could see either of them. Aldridge was a composed man, older than Nathaniel by 9 years. Gray at the temples, easy in his movements, with the particular relaxed authority of someone who had been the most competent person in most rooms for long enough that he no longer felt the need to demonstrate it. He looked at Nathaniel and seemed to make the identification without visible effort. "Sterling," he said, not unkindly. "Aldridge." A pause. The waiting room was very small. "I withdrew the inquiry," Aldridge said. "In September. I wanted you to know in case you didn't." Nathaniel looked at him. "I didn't know." Mrs. Sterling never responded, which was answer enough. Aldridge looked at him with the even directness of a man who said what he meant. "I understand from various sources that you've been doing considerable work this season." "Trying to." "More than trying from what I hear." He paused. "Graves speaks highly of you. He told someone who told someone the way these things go. And Graves is not a man who inflates assessments." "No," Nathaniel said. "He isn't." Aldridge picked up his hat. "She's a remarkable woman, your wife." "I know that." "Good." He said it simply, without edge. "It's the kind of thing a man should know about the woman he married, not after the fact." He stood. "Good luck to you, Sterling. I mean that without reservation." He went in to see Carter. Nathaniel sat in the waiting room and thought about what it meant that a man who had inquired after his wife, a good man by every observable measure, had looked at the situation in September and withdrawn. Had decided Eleanor was not available in the way that mattered. She hadn't told Aldridge no. She had simply not answered. And silence, he was learning, was its own kind of language. Eleanor's silences in particular had always contained more information than most people's words. The twist that December brought was not what he expected. He had expected December to be quiet, the post-harvest settling period. The accounts closed for the year, the estate moving into its winter rhythm. He had expected to spend December building the petition documentation and meeting with Carter and doing the smaller maintenance work that winter allowed. What he did not expect was the letter from his cousin Edmund Sterling. Edmund was 38 years old, the only other male Sterling of his generation, and he had spent most of Nathaniel's life operating at a comfortable distance from the main estate, while still considering himself entitled to its eventual proceeds. He had not, as far as Nathaniel could recall, ever spent a meaningful amount of time on Sterling land, or expressed any particular interest in agricultural management. The letter arrived at Carter's office addressed to the estate council. Carter read it first, as was his professional obligation, and then walked to the boarding house at 7 in the evening and knocked on Nathaniel's door, which told Nathaniel before he read a single word that the letter contained something worth walking across town in December cold to deliver personally. He read it. Edmund was petitioning the family council for consideration as an alternative primary trustee, on the grounds that Nathaniel's removal created a vacancy that required permanent resolution and that the estate's interests would be better served by a trustee who had not demonstrated the conduct that had led to Nathaniel's removal, and that the 2-year petition window for reinstatement was unnecessarily prolonged given the estate's need for stable management. "He's trying to take it," Nathaniel said. "He's making a legal argument," Carter said carefully. "He's trying to take the estate. He has standing to petition. He is Sterling blood. The trust allows for alternative trustee consideration if the primary trustee position is," Carter chose the word carefully, "in question." "It's not in question," Nathaniel said. "Eleanor is managing it. Eleanor is managing it as interim trustee. That position is stable, but technically temporary." Carter sat down. "Edmund's lawyers, and he has engaged very competent lawyers, are arguing that a permanent appointment would serve the estate better than an ongoing interim arrangement." Nathaniel stood up. He moved not with agitation, not with the old reflex of a man who responded to threats with performance, but with the controlled urgency of someone who understood clearly what was at stake and was already calculating what could be done about it. "Can Eleanor block the petition?" he said. "Not block it. She can contest it. Argue that the interim arrangement is working, which it demonstrably is given the harvest numbers and the Drummond resolution. She can present the documentary record." Carter paused. "But Edmund's argument is not about whether the estate is being managed well. His argument is about whether the management structure is legally appropriate for the long term. He doesn't want the estate," Nathaniel said suddenly. "He doesn't care about the land. He cares about the income." He turned to Carter. "What does the trust say about trustee compensation?" Carter was still for a moment. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. 20 minutes later, Nathaniel had his answer. The trust's trustee compensation clause, written in his grandfather's era, updated by his father, provided the primary trustee with a percentage of annual estate income. A percentage that, given how significantly Eleanor had grown, the estate's productivity had increased considerably in value. Edmund didn't want to run Sterling Manor. He wanted to own the income from the woman who was running it. "He's going to put his name on her work," Nathaniel said. "That is a possible interpretation of, that is what is happening, Carter." His voice was low and very clear. "He is going to put his name on 3 years of Eleanor's work and collect income from her management and call himself a trustee." He looked at Carter directly. "What does the petition timeline look like if we accelerate? Your petition is 9 months away at minimum. What if Eleanor supports it? Not just attends, actively supports. Would the council consider an accelerated review?" Carter was quiet. "She said she would be there," Nathaniel said. "At the review. She told me in September. If she agrees to move from presence to active support, if she is willing to stand before the council and say that the estate's interests are best served by my reinstatement, how quickly could we bring this forward?" 60 days, Carter said slowly. "Possibly 45, if the documentation holds." "The documentation holds." "Nathaniel." Carter looked at him with the gravity of a man who was about to say something that required listening to carefully. "If you go to Eleanor with this, if you ask her to accelerate her position, to move from neutral attendance to active support on a timeline that serves your interests." He paused. "You need to understand what you are asking her to do. You are asking her to make herself publicly vulnerable for you, again, before she is ready, before the full 2 years." Nathaniel was quiet. "I know," he said. Is that fair to her? He stood with that for a long moment. No, he said. It's not. He looked at Carter. But Edmund's petition is not fair to her either, and she doesn't know it exists yet. He picked up his coat. I'm going to tell her. I'm going to tell her everything Edmund the compensation clause what it means. And then I am going to let her decide. Not ask her. Tell her the situation and let her decide what she wants to do. He paused. She has always been the most capable person in this situation. She deserves to know all of it. Carter looked at him for a long moment. When did you become this person? He said quietly. Nathaniel buttoned his coat. Somewhere between June and December, he said. With a great deal of help I didn't deserve. He walked out into the December cold and turned his steps toward Sterling Manor and the gate that had been opening inch by inch all season long, and kept walking. The cold hit him before he reached the gate. December in Virginia had a particular kind of cold. Not the dramatic bone-crushing cold of the northern states, but a quiet, persistent chill that crept under coat collars and settled into joints and reminded a man that the world had teeth even in places that looked gentle. Nathaniel walked fast, not because the cold demanded it, but because he had learned over the past 6 months that hesitation was its own form of cowardice. Thomas answered the gate bell with the expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by Nathaniel Sterling's evening arrivals sometime around October. Mrs. Sterling, Nathaniel said. Please, it's urgent. Not personal estate business. She needs to hear something tonight. Thomas studied him, then nodded and went inside. The wait was shorter than it had ever been. Eleanor came to the gate in her working clothes, a shawl over her shoulders, against the cold, holding a candle. She looked at his face, and whatever she saw there made her step back immediately. Come in, she said. Not what is it or this is unusual. Just come in. The instinct of a woman who had learned to read urgency accurately. They went to the east parlor. She set the candle on the table and looked at him and waited. He told her about Edmund's letter. All of it, the petition, the alternative trustee argument, the compensation clause. He laid it out plainly in the same order he had understood it himself, without softening the implications or editorializing about Edmund's motives. He gave her the facts and let her mind do what her mind always did with facts. It took her approximately 90 seconds to arrive at the same conclusion he had. He wants the income, she said. Yes. He doesn't want the work. He wants his name on my numbers and a percentage of my harvest. That's my read. She was very still for a moment. Not with the stillness of shock. Eleanor did not shock easily, but with the particular stillness of a woman who is deciding something. He had learned to recognize it over 6 months of watching her from across fields and across tables and through iron bars. How much time do we have before the council responds to his petition? She asked. Carter thinks 30 days before they're obligated to formally consider it. If we move in that window, if there's a counterfiling, we can shape the timeline. What kind of counterfiling? An accelerated reinstatement petition, Nathaniel said. My petition moved forward. With... He stopped. He had told himself he would say it directly and not dress it up. With your active support instead of neutral attendance. The candle between them made small movements in the draft from the window. You're asking me to stand before the council, Eleanor said. Not just attend, stand up and say I support your reinstatement. I'm not asking you, he said. I'm telling you the situation and letting you decide. Those are different things. He met her eyes. If you decide that an accelerated petition is not something you can support, not yet, not in 45 days, I will find another way to address Edmund's petition. I am not going to put you in a position where you're choosing between your own readiness and the estate's protection. That is not a choice you should have to make because of my mistakes. She looked at him for a long time. But you believe the reinstatement is the cleanest solution, she said. I believe you deserve to have your name on your work, he said. I believe you deserve to be the one who decides what happens to this estate, not Edmund, not the council, not me. You've run it for 3 years. Whatever happens between us, that should be recognized. He paused. The cleanest legal path to that recognition runs through the reinstatement. Yes. The quiet stretched. Then Eleanor said, I need to think. Take the time you need. I mean tonight, she said. I need an hour. She came back in 50 minutes. She sat down across from him at the east parlor table, the same table where they had worked the Drummond matter, where she had first said, do what you must. I will manage, where they had sat across from each other, like the partners they had been, and the partners they were still somehow tentatively becoming again. I spoke with Margaret, she said. She was already here, she came for supper and stayed. I told her everything. What did she say? Eleanor almost smiled. She said, and I am quoting precisely because Margaret is precise, if you let Edmund Sterling put his name on your harvest numbers, I will never forgive you, and I am a woman who keeps her word. Something loosened in Nathaniel's chest. She's not wrong. She is almost never wrong. Eleanor folded her hands on the table. I also spoke with Graves. He was in the kitchen. He'd come to drop off the final November account summary. She paused. I asked him what he thought the council would make of the petition documentation. What did he say? He said, the documentation is the strongest I've seen in 15 years of Sterling land management, and I have seen the whole of it. She looked at Nathaniel directly. He meant yours, the work you've done since June. Nathaniel was quiet. And then I sat by myself for 20 minutes, Eleanor said, and I thought about the woman who stood at this gate in June and said knowing what you lost is not the same as deserving to have it returned. She paused. I still believe that. I want you to know that hasn't changed. I know it hasn't, but I also think. She stopped, started again with the careful honesty of someone speaking a true thing for the first time. I think the woman who said that was protecting herself, which was right, which was necessary. But I've been protecting myself for 6 months, while also watching you become someone I don't entirely recognize from the man who left. She looked at him. And at some point, protection becomes its own kind of wall. And I have spent enough years on the wrong side of walls to know I don't want to build one myself. The candle flame moved. Eleanor, he said. His voice came out rough at the edges. I will stand before the council, she said. I will support the reinstatement. Not because Edmund pushed us to it. Not because the timeline forced my hand. She held his gaze steadily. Because it is what I believe is right. And because... She stopped, swallowed once. Because I have watched you every Tuesday morning in that east field, and I have read Graves's reports, and I read Carter's documentation, and I know what I know. I know good work when I see it. I know real change when I watch it. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. I know who you are becoming, and I am choosing to believe in that person. The room was completely silent. That is not a guarantee, she said. Of anything. Of where we end up. Of what this means for us beyond the estate. I know, he said. It is a beginning, if you want it to be. He reached across the table. Not to take her hand, he stopped short of that. He placed his hand on the table near hers, an inch of space between them, and looked at her. I want it to be, he said. She looked at his hand, then at him. Then she placed her hand over his. 1 second. 2. Warm and real and nothing like performance. Then she withdrew it and picked up this candle and said in her perfectly composed voice, We need to tell Carter tonight. He'll want to file before Edmund's lawyers have the morning. And just like that, they were both moving toward the door, toward the hall, toward Carter, and the petition, and the machinery of the thing that needed doing. And Nathaniel followed her, and felt something he did not have a word for. Something that wasn't happiness exactly, because it was too careful, and too new, and too aware of its own fragility. But that was alive in a way nothing had been alive in him for years. Carter's light was still on. The man kept extraordinary hours, which Nathaniel had come to understand was not a professional eccentricity, but a personal philosophy. Carter believed that things that needed doing did not improve from being left until morning. He opened the door at their knock, looked at the two of them standing together on his step for the first time since any of this had begun, and said nothing for a moment. Then, come in. They told him Eleanor's decision. He listened without interrupting, which was how Carter always listened, with the focused stillness of a man building a legal argument in real time. When they finished, he was quiet for exactly the amount of time it took him to complete the structure in his mind. 40 days, he said. I need 40 days to build the counterfiling and prepare the council presentation. Can you give me 40 days? Yes, Eleanor said. The documentation will stand, Carter said to Nathaniel. I want you to know that clearly. What you've built since June, the accounts, the tenant records, the Drummond resolution, the witness work, it will stand. The council will not find a weak case. I know, Nathaniel said. Carter looked at both of them. I've been practicing law for 20 years, he said. I have filed a great many petitions. I have seen reinstatements and removals and every variety of family complexity that estate law produces. He paused. I have never filed a petition that I believed in more than this one. Eleanor looked at him. Because of the documentation. Because of the reason for it, Carter said simply. The 40 days passed with the focused intensity of a people doing something that mattered under a deadline that meant it. Carter built the counterfiling with the methodical care of someone who understood that every word in a legal document either helped or didn't, and who was not willing to include anything that didn't help. Nathaniel provided documentation, answered questions, rode back to 2 of the Richmond witnesses for supplemental statements that strengthened the timeline of his changed conduct. Eleanor prepared the estate's financial summary, 3 years of her numbers laid out with the clarity and precision that had always characterized her work, demonstrating beyond any reasonable argument that Sterling Manor was not in need of a new trustee. It was in need of the right one. Edmund Sterling made exactly one attempt to speak with Nathaniel directly. It happened on the third week of January, outside Carter's office, on a cold morning, when Edmund had apparently miscalculated either Nathaniel's schedule or his own legal team's advice. He was a tall man, Edmund taller than Nathaniel by an inch, with the particular social ease of someone who had spent his life being the most charming person in whatever room required least of him. Cousin, Edmund said, with the warmth of a man who believed warmth was a kind of currency he could spend freely. Edmund. Nathaniel stopped. He did not extend his hand. Something shifted in Edmund's face, the fractional recalibration of a man encountering unexpected resistance. I hope you understand that my petition is nothing personal. It's purely about the estate's stability. I understand perfectly what it's about, Nathaniel said. Your situation it's complicated, Nathaniel. Surely you can see that from the outside the estate needs. The estate, Nathaniel said, had its best harvest in 7 years. Its debt is cleared. Its tenant agreements are restructured and equitable. Its Richmond market contracts are the strongest in the county. He looked at Edmund with the complete steadiness of a man who had learned over 7 months that clarity was more powerful than anger. All of that happened while I was not the trustee. It happened because Eleanor ran this estate with more competence than anyone in this county has managed in a generation. What the estate does not need, Edmund, is your name on her work. Edmund stared at him. You should speak with your lawyers, Nathaniel said. Today. Tell them the documentation they'll be facing in that council room. He picked up his coat. Good morning. He walked past him and into Carter's office and did not look back. Carter, who had heard everything through the thin office wall, said nothing when Nathaniel came in. He simply poured 2 cups of coffee and pushed one across the desk. The council meeting was held on a Thursday in February in the county courthouse meeting room with 5 members of the extended Sterling family trust present. Carter, representing the estate, and Edmund's lawyers seated at the opposite table, with the slightly tighter expressions of people who had reviewed the documentation and understood the shape of what they were walking into. Eleanor sat beside Carter. Nathaniel sat on her other side. They had not discussed the seating arrangement. It had simply happened naturally, the way things happened between 2 people who had been finding their way back to each other, 1 careful inch at a time. The council chairman, a distant Sterling cousin named Albright, a dry and precise man who had held the position for 12 years, opened the proceedings and read the formal statement of the case. Edmund's petition, the counter-filing, the request for accelerated reinstatement review. Then he looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Sterling," Albright said, "the trust requires your formal statement. Are you here in neutral attendance or in active support of the reinstatement petition?" The room was very still. Eleanor had dressed for this morning, the way she dressed for everything that mattered, not to perform, but to be exactly herself. She sat straight. She looked at Albright directly. She did not look at Nathaniel, though he was 12 inches to her left, and she did not look at Edmund, though he was across the room. "Active support," she said, "fully and without reservation." Edmund's lead lawyer made a small movement with his pen. Albright nodded and made a notation. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling. And on what basis do you offer that support?" Eleanor reached for the document in front of her. Her own document, prepared in her own words, in the clear and measured language of a woman who had spent 3 years learning exactly what she knew and what she was worth. She read for 20 minutes. She read the harvest numbers, the tenant restructurings, the Drummond resolution. She read Graves's formal attestation to Nathaniel's conduct and competence since June. She read the Eastfield account recovery, the Tillman error correction, the Richmond witness work. She read the documented record of a man who had made serious errors, understood what they cost, and spent 7 months becoming someone whose work could be verified and trusted. And then she set the document down and said in her own words, "I managed this estate alone for 3 years because I believed it was worth protecting. I still believe that. I support Nathaniel Sterling's reinstatement, not because he is my husband, and not because I am obligated to, and not because of any pressure from any direction. I support it because the record shows that he has earned it, and because I have watched him earn it with my own eyes since June." She paused. This estate was built by people who understood that a name is nothing without the work behind it. Nathaniel Sterling understands that now. Edmund Sterling has never been required to learn it. She looked at Albright. "The council should consider which kind of trustee this estate needs." The room was completely silent. Then Edmund's lead lawyer leaned over and said something quietly to his colleague, and his colleague wrote something on a paper, and they had a short murmured exchange, and then the lead lawyer looked at Albright and said, "The petitioner requests a brief recess to consult." Albright allowed it. The recess lasted 11 minutes. When Edmund's lawyers returned, they announced that Edmund Sterling was withdrawing his petition for alternative trusteeship, citing the strength of the counter-documentation and the primary trustee's clear and unambiguous position. Edmund himself said nothing. He looked at Nathaniel once, not with hostility, not with graciousness, with the carefully blanked expression of a man absorbing a defeat he had not adequately prepared for, and then he looked away and did not look back. Albright noted the withdrawal, reviewed the reinstatement documentation for an additional 40 minutes with the thorough precision of a man who understood his responsibility, asked Carter and Nathaniel a series of specific questions about the account frameworks and management protocols going forward, received clear and documented answers to every one of them, and then looked at the council members on either side of him. The vote was 4-1 in favor of reinstatement. The dissenting vote from a Sterling cousin named Mrs. Hargrove, who had not particularly liked Nathaniel before any of this started, and saw no compelling reason to change her position, was noted and recorded and did not alter the outcome. Carter shook Nathaniel's hand. Then he shook Eleanor's. "Well done," he said, to both of them equally. Outside the courthouse, in the February cold, with the white Virginia winter sitting over everything, and the sound of the county going about its business on the road, Eleanor and Nathaniel stood side by side for a moment without speaking. It was the first time they had been outside together, truly outside in a public place, without a gate between them, or a table between them, or a professional context around them, since before he had left. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he agreed. She pulled her shawl tighter. He watched her profile the line of her jaw, the particular composure she always carried, the thing behind her eyes that was not quite settled yet, but was no longer the guarded stillness of June. "What happens now?" she said. Not anxiously. Genuinely curious, the way a woman asks about a future she has decided to consider. He thought about the question seriously, because she deserved a serious answer. "Now I go back to work," he said. "The spring accounts are already building. Graves says the south parcel needs a decision on the rotation before April. The Tillman credit needs to be formally recorded in the New Year's ledger. He paused. And I would like if you're willing to start attending the tenant meetings. Not to take them over. To be there. To know the names. All of them. She looked at him. You want to know the names? I should have known them years ago. He held her gaze. I want to do things I should have done years ago. Not to compensate for the past. Because they're the right things to do, and this is the right life, and I don't want to miss any more of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the Holt family. James, his wife Ruth, and their children. Billy is 12. He's the one who brought you the water in June. There's also Clara, who is 9, and the youngest is Thomas, named after Thomas, who works the gate, Nathaniel said quietly. Eleanor looked at him with something in her face he hadn't seen since the early years. Something open. Something that had decided to risk being open. Yes, she said. Thomas, who works the gate. She paused. You knew. I'm learning to pay attention, he said. I told you. The problem with paying attention is that you start knowing things you can't afford not to know. The February cold moved between them and around them, and neither of them moved away from it. Come home, Eleanor said. 2 words. Plain and direct, the way Eleanor always said the truest things. He looked at her. Are you certain? He asked. I am not certain about everything, she said. I am not certain where we end up, or what it looks like, or how long it takes to build something that holds. But I am certain that I don't want to stand outside my own life any more than you wanted to stand outside this gate. She met his eyes without flinching. Come home. We'll figure out the rest from inside. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked back toward Sterling Manor together in the February cold. The road they had both traveled separately for 7 months. Now traveled together. The distance between them not erased. Nothing. Honest could be erased, but held, carried, understood for what it was, and what it had cost, and what it had made of them both. 3 years later, Sterling Manor was the most productive estate in the county. Nathaniel ran the accounts and attended every tenant meeting and knew every family on the land by name and history. He made mistakes, smaller ones, the ordinary mistakes of a man doing real work in the real world, and he caught them himself, or Graves caught them, and they were fixed without drama and recorded honestly in the ledger. Eleanor ran the estate strategy, the market negotiations, the crop decisions, the long-range planning that had always been her particular genius. She also, in the spring of 1820, opened the East Parlor twice a month to the tenant women of Sterling Land. A meeting she described to the county simply as a practical gathering, and that was in practice one of the most significant things that had ever happened on that land. Margaret Whitmore attended the first one and told Eleanor afterward that it was exactly what she had expected, which was high praise from Margaret. Carter retired from active practice in 1821 and named a younger partner to handle the estate accounts. But he came to dinner at Sterling Manor twice a year and sat at their table and ate their food and watched the two of them together with the private satisfaction of a man who had done good work at an important moment and knew it. James Holt's son. Billy grew up and worked the East Field and was by general consensus the sharpest agricultural mind in his generation. Nathaniel noticed it first. He told Eleanor, who told Graves, who started including Billy in the planning conversations before the boy was 17. No one was surprised, because Nathaniel Sterling had learned somewhere between a locked gate in June and a February courthouse and a 10,000 Tuesday mornings in an East Field that the most important work a person could do was to pay attention, to see what was actually in front of them, to recognize what was real and worth protecting before the cost of not protecting it became the whole shape of their life. He had learned it the hard way. The only way some lessons come through loss, through shame, through the long and unromantic business of becoming someone better than you were. And Eleanor had given him the one thing he hadn't deserved and couldn't have demanded and had no claim to except the claim of honest effort and genuine change. She had given him the chance to prove it. That was not a small thing. That was, in fact, everything. And on Tuesday mornings, when the Eastfield boundary needed checking, they walked it together side by side at the same pace, both of them counting the same fence posts and noting the same soil and knowing by name every family whose life was woven into the land beneath their feet. The gate at Stirling Manor was never locked again.